If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it. My name's Arthur. Thank you for joining me as we continue to read in Genesis, and we're reading this morning chapter 4 and verses 1 to 8. The command given by God to Adam and Eve in the very beginning was be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So it was always God's intention for a man and his wife to have children and to raise the children up. It was not God's intention that there should be so much sorrow associated with this process, but now there is, and it began in the very first family. Let's read our passage together. Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. Then she bore again, this time his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in the process of time it came to pass that Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground to the Lord. Abel also brought of the firstlings of his flock, and of their fat. And the Lord respected Abel and his offering, but he had no respect of Cain, but he did not respect Cain and his offering. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. So the Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door. And its desire is for you, but you should rule over it. Now Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass, when they were in the field, that Cain rose against Abel his brother, and killed him. And may the Lord bless these words to us. So, sin lies at the door. We all are acquainted with sin. There was no sin associated with Adam and Eve having children. That was God's plan. And the roles that the children took in the world, there was no criticism of the fact that Cain was a farmer who tilled the ground, while Abel was a shepherd who looked after the sheep. But these two lifestyles do reflect a little bit on character, because a shepherd has a continual process of looking after the sheep. He's got to watch out for them every day. Whereas the farmer who tills the ground, well, he has periods of intense activity and periods of less activity. Now, in the process of time, they both came and brought an offering to the Lord. Obviously, the concept of worshipping God, was present in this first family. Adam and Eve worshipped God, and they taught their children to worship God. And the things that they brought were the offerings of their time and energy, what they'd invested in. Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel brought of the firstlings of his flock and of their fat. Now both of these things are seen later in the Hebrew offerings as offerings that are acceptable to God, as thanks offerings and as peace offerings. So the complaint here is not about the offering itself either. But we find that God did not respect Cain, and therefore he rejected his offering. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. So the Lord received Abel's offering, but there was a problem in Cain's life. Cain's attitude was not right, and God could see that. And so when Cain brought his offering, the Lord would not accept it, and he's saying, you've got to overcome the sin that's in your life before you bring an offering. Now, one aspect of the offering is the whole thought that the fig leaves that Adam and Eve covered themselves with was not an adequate covering for sin, and an animal had to be killed to provide skins for their clothing. And so that aspect of it here is that a lamb was killed in the offering that Abel brought, suggesting an offering for sin. The offering of the grain is a wave offering and a first fruits offering, but it is never given any merit for the atoning of sin, because it is the produce of the ground which is cursed. Blood needs to be shed for sin to be covered. Well, Cain brought his offering, and when the Lord did not receive it, Cain was angry. He wasn't going to listen to what God was saying. He was going to stand on his digs, as they say. And the Lord challenged Cain about this. Why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? Why get cross with God when God points out the obvious? And unfortunately, there are people today who are cross with God when the problem is not God, the problem is their own sin and sinful nature. And God's answer to Cain was, you do the right thing. If you do well, you will be accepted. If the orientation of your life is towards righteousness, then I'll receive you. But if you continue to do evil, sin lies at the door. And the picture is as a lion lying in wait, seeking to entrap a person. And its desire is for you, and you should rule over it. We all are tempted to sin. It is in the very nature of us. It is the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, which are lurking, always there. There's always something that will say, so-and-so has this, I wish I had that. Or, isn't that beautiful, I wish I had that. Or, I'm better than he is, I should be. And Cain was the oldest brother, and so his offering should be received ahead of Abel, his younger brother. He had higher status, he was the oldest. Well, it doesn't work that way, does it? And so he didn't overcome his feelings, his anger, but he gave way to it. He couldn't beat God, but he was in conversation to Abel, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and killed him. Sadly, when people oppose God, they take it out on innocent people. They can't get at God, they can only get at God's people. And the pattern that is laid down here has continued through the centuries. People are still angry with God because they are sinful. They have not acknowledged their sin and asked for forgiveness. And if someone rebukes them or challenges them about their behaviour, or even if somebody even mentions God to them, they rise up scheming to oppose God and oppose God's people. Well, it is something that we all need to be careful with. It is a struggle, as Paul points out in Romans 7. We are continually struggling against sin in our lives. And the Christian has the power to overcome sin, but he will never be excused from the challenges of sin. Satan always seeks to find a ground to attack us in any of the ways that we might be attacked. He is always on the prowl. A shining light, a roaring lion, whichever way he comes to us, he will desire to make us sin. He will seek to fuel our own desires. God doesn't tempt anyone to sin, but we are led astray by our own lusts, James explains. And so Cain spoke with Abel, and then he rose up and killed his brother. And so men are rising up and inexplicably killing one another today. But the problem so often is not that they have a beef with their brother. It is that they have a beef with God.